Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Rock Your Shine After You've Been Cracked Wide Open. I just don't really have the words for my level of excitement for my guest this week on this episode, because we have literally been trying to schedule this now for 6 months. So I am just completely delighted to have Edwin with me today. So let me introduce Edwin Stevens to you. I'm going to read his bio. Edwin is a filmmaker who grew up in the state of Maine, and he lived in LA for a decade. And now he resides in Arizona. He has been fortunate enough to have worked on a lot of awesome projects as a filmmaker. He's done HBO's The Defiant ones, Down East, Hunting Lands, and Dark Harbor. When his sister was horrifically murdered, his sister, her name is Alice, when she was horrifically murdered in 2013, it inspired Edwin to make a film which he entitled Alice is Still Dead. And it is about her life and her death. And he did this in an attempt to navigate his own grief through his art. He is lucky to be blessed with his amazing wife, Cecilia, and his three wonderful children. So, Edwin, thank you to the show. Thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me and thank you for holding on when we tried to schedule it. And thank you for that wonderful introduction as well. I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's perfect. And I watched your film. It was a mutual friend who connected us, because what we held in common, of course, was that we both lost a sibling, and that we both navigated our grief through our own art, me through my writing and you through your film. So why don't you go ahead? Let's talk about Alice first. I would love for
Sure.
you to share a little bit about your sister, what made her so wonderful, bring her to life for us, and then your story.
It's always tough to describe someone, especially after you've lost them, I think, to feel like you're doing them any justice in like a couple minutes of summary. But we adopted Alice when I was 3.5. She's about 3.5 years younger than I was. And we my parents were older. My mom had me at 38, so like Alice was not going to happen naturally and or biologically anyways. And we got in our wood panel station wagon in 89, and we drove all the way out to Bakersfield, California from Maine to pick up Alice, and she didn't disappoint. She was a bundle of joy. She just lit up the room when she was there. She was one of those people that, whether it was because she was like physically beautiful or because she was charismatic, like people were just drawn to her for in good ways. And I think, unfortunately, I think she drew a lot of people to her that needed extra support or help, because she really liked to help other people. I mean, that was like her thing. And I don't want to say that people shouldn't help other people. That's not what I mean by this. But unfortunately, in her case, she got herself in. Her boyfriend that she stayed with for probably longer than she should have, because they had some physical incidents, and he'd be incarcerated for a month because of one of the domestic incidents got so bad. But he was a chef, and a couple people that he had hired to work underneath him were pretty bad people. And when he had to fire one of them, oddly enough, it was like 3 or 4 months after he had been fired, he decided to take vengeance on my sister's boyfriend. And Alice happened to be at the scene and was a witness. So they killed her as well. And it was pretty brutal.
God,
You know,
Edwin.
just it's weird, especially being from Maine in the 90s. I mean, there was never any crime, or certainly no violent crime. So just to have Alice's life end that way is so insane. It was not anything that was ever around us, but she
How,
ended
how,
up in
how how old was Alice at the time?
Alice was 24 when she was killed. She ended up in Georgia, and she loved it down there. But it's hard for me I often wrestle with this. Is the world more violent now, or do we just know it's more violent because we have access to news and social media at our fingertips all the time? Either
Interesting.
way, unfortunately, she met a violent demise in Georgia. And I think it was particularly tough to know that she was killed intentionally. I mean, I think it's one thing to not that it makes it any more or less intense, but that, say someone gets hit by a car, or you're in an accident, or something, like that's an awful way to lose someone, but no one intentionally took them out. That like extra level of evil, I guess I want to call it. It's tough to have to have it touch your family, and think, my parents are in their 60s and 70s when this happened. Like, how do you equip yourself with the tools to get through that kind of experience? And that's, I mean, what we struggled with for years, and kind of still continue to struggle with at times, and it's been over a decade now.
Let me ask a few questions, just if we could back up.
Sure.
First of all, everybody in the land of loss can't stand when people say, "I'm so sorry for your loss," because there is nothing else that there's simply nothing that you can say, right? I mean, there's nothing anybody can ever say. And that's why,
I think it's tough on both sides, though, right? Because you want to say more too, but what are the words? And I want to
right,
hear more, but we can't even communicate how
right.
deeply sensitive the situation is, I guess, for any
Well,
loss.
right, but I want to comment on I want to slow the story down and ask a couple of questions, and but
Please.
what I want to just say before that is that the idea of murder, and I interviewed somebody whose sister was murdered for my book, and I do think that murder brings on so many different layers that really complicate and prolong suffering around our loss, because the rage, just the rage, the anger that we will talk about that comes with, I got chills talking about it because I can feel the energy of that. And I remember thinking after I lost my brother, the gratitude I had that I didn't lose him to something like that, because that that is just a different, it is a whole different layer of what people need to move through around that kind of a violent, senseless end. So let's table that for a moment. We will get back to that. But what I want to ask you, because I think that this probably complicated things too, is that she was with a guy that sounded like he was violent, right? There was some domestic violence that happened between them. And what I want to ask you, you're the older brother, right? It sounds like you and your sister were very tight. You guys were very good friends. And it was just the two of you, right? It was just you and your sister, right?
So we had older brothers, the older half brothers. From my dad's previous marriage, his first wife passed away early, unfortunately.
Okay.
So my mother's only kids, yes.
Okay. Are you do you have a relationship with your other siblings?
I do. Unfortunately, the oldest also passed, but the
Wow.
remaining sibling and I are pretty close. But we're also about 15 years apart in age, so it's not like we're going through the same things in life at the same time.
Right. That's
It's
significant.
great for me. I get all the older brotherly advice, but I don't think I can help him very much. He's already gone through everything and like halfway towards retirement. So
All right. So going back to your sister. So was there conversation with you and your parents around the concern that she was involved with this? I mean, obviously, if there was these altercations, you guys must have been concerned about what was happening. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I'm sure our listeners are wondering the same thing.
sure. I mean, it actually, I don't know how deep we want to get into it, but it kind of started a few years before. I want to say, I mean, a few years is kind of diluting the situation. Alice started getting into kind of normal teenage trouble, I think, around her freshman, sophomore year of high school. But then it kind of escalated to a point when her friends could drive and things, she would just say that, basically, I'm going to do this. And what are you going to do to stop me, parents? I mean, I'm going to go out and do this. And if you don't want me to, okay, like I'm 16 or whatever. What are you going to do? So there were warning signs for a while. My parents tried really hard. They put her in. They ended up having her go to one of these outdoor wilderness camps that's supposed to like support the child, and it's for troubled teenagers, and it's supposed to help raise the confidence in the child so that they realize, because at the root of everything, basically, I think a lot of what at least teenagers, why they act out and lash out at other people, is insecurity. Like they need to feel like they have more power than they believe they do sometimes. And I think that's where Alice's issues stemmed from. She was
Mhm.
always like really, she had a really hard time with being adopted. She had a really hard time
I
with
was
that
going to
first
go there.
adoption.
I was going to ask you about that, right? Like what some kids can go through after they've been adopted is this identity crisis. Who am I? How come my parents didn't want me? Like all of the things that come with. Okay, so that's
And I
great.
think basically Alice's insecurities and lack of confidence stemmed from like the person who birthed me didn't even want me. That was my first thing that ever happened to me was I was given away. Like I can't be good enough. How can you feel good enough? And the odd statistic was after she went through this camp, the next step was to put her into like some special kind of prep school, a boarding school, and she was like, I think there was maybe one kid in the whole school that wasn't adopted, which is crazy to think about that was that prolific. But unfortunately, I feel like for Alice, because she hadn't gotten to drugs or like violent crime or anything like that, or theft like a lot of these other kids did, is that she felt like I'm the good kid here. Like I'm just learning bad things from these other people. I don't think she And I think she did reflect. I think she did gain some insight and some strength from those experiences, but I think it came with some cons as well in her case. But nevertheless, so she ended up in Savannah, Georgia, and she was kind of just figuring out what she wanted to do with her life. I mean, she was only 24. I know it was probably
So
some.
wait, so she went to the
Mhm.
Outward Bound thing. Did she go to boarding school through high school and then
She
she
went,
went?
yeah. So for her junior, senior year, she was at a boarding school. I mean, that was another tough thing for her, though. She went to one high school for freshman year, and then she went to another high school for sophomore year, and then she went to the boarding school for junior, senior year. So she just had to keep starting over. And I don't think she ever really felt like she had a real community because she didn't really have time to, put in roots anywhere.
What was going
Um,
on with you as the brother, right? Because at this point you're around 28 years old, 29, right? So you're out on your own, you're doing your thing. What's happening in your relationship with her?
So yeah, when she was in high school, I was, let's see. So I was in my freshman year of college. And another, thing that happened is that our older brother took his own life. And that kind of also was like a big, chasm that opened up a schism there.
Wow,
So
Edwin.
that threw a lot of things into the mix. I came home for a semester from college because I was all mixed up about it. And I think Alice had similar issues, but she was in high school. She didn't take a semester off. That's not really an option then.
Right.
So I don't think that helped the emotional turmoil and
And
anguish that
how
she
are your
was
parents
experiencing,
dealing with all of this? They've got Alice that's getting into some things,
right?
and they've lost a son to sue. I just,
Yeah.
what's happening with them? What are they doing? They
That's
must also feel at their wits' end.
Yes, I think so too. Yeah. Yeah, I think that noticeably, I think that everyone was a little more stressed and irritable for the next how many years almost. So at this point, I'm on my own. I guess I'd be about 24, and Alice she decided that the college she was at in the first place wasn't really for her, and she wanted to go back to photography school and start over, which was great, but that she actually like had something that she considered an interest. She was having trouble just trying to figure out what exactly she wanted to narrow her focus to.
Mm.
And that didn't work out either, unfortunately. So she had a bad experience in her first class, and she kind of gave up. And it was a bummer. But she seemed like she was pretty happy, despite the incidents that we got word from police later on that she had been in a couple of domestic disputes. And so it's really unclear at that point. I think she was feeling pretty bad that she couldn't figure out what she wanted to do and who she wanted to be. And so and also she was in a domestic, or an abusive relationship. So I think all
Had you met her boyfriend at this point, or you just had
met
heard about
him
him?
many times. Yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
they would come. I would see him probably once a year. I think they were together for 4 or 5 years. I mean, it
And
was a long.
how did you feel about him before the domestic, but like how did you as a brother, like what?
He he tried really hard to impress us, and I thought that was a good sign that he cared enough to try to show us that he was good enough for Alice, because we all felt like no one was, obviously. I mean, that's that's the way it is with
Right,
the big sister.
right.
But yeah, it was interesting to see, because he was one person around us all the time. He was great. He was helpful. He was very kind. And then to hear about this other person that would come out behind closed doors was confusing and scary and hurtful. I mean, it was tough to live with. Yeah.
Had she talked that did as her brother after these domestic disputes, did you talk to her? Did you ask her, try to get her out of the relationship? What was happening between you and Alice? Or was she kind of pushing her family away? What was going on in that dynamic?
It came in waves. There were times where Alice felt like she needed to see the light, and she wanted to climb out of that situation, and she would reach out for help. And I would say, hey, whenever you're ready, you have a place here, with us. Please come, because I think she had so many problems with my parents too that she didn't want to go home. It was a big part of it, right? But I was hoping that maybe if we extended an olive branch out in LA, that she would want to come live with me. And LA's a cool young town. I mean, I think she would have liked it there. She really liked to have fun, but the waves would come and go. I mean, she would have a couple days where that's what she wanted to do, and then she would break off communication for like a couple weeks because I think she was embarrassed or ashamed that she decided she wanted to stay, and she knew that's not what any of us wanted for her. And she didn't want to hear, not that I would lecture her, but she didn't want to hear any kind of lecturing or and I understand that. And I understand that that's pretty common in violent relationships or abusive relationships, is that, the abuser knows that they're not treating the person right. So they don't want they don't want the abusee
They
to get
they
any
they want to
side input.
isolate. Yeah, they want to
Exactly.
isolate them. Yeah.
Exactly. The isolation was bad. And we had trouble kind of getting her on the phone and for about the last year of her life, honestly.
Yeah.
She had just started reaching out again, like around her birthday in September, to my parents and said that she wanted them to. My parents were living in Florida at the time. She wanted them to come up for her birthday and things. And then she really wanted to see them, and she was really excited about it. Unfortunately, my dad was very sick at the time. I mean, he was sick for about 15 years of my life. He had multiple cancers. So
Wow.
so they didn't really feel like they could make that happen. And I think that my mother, regrets that now. My father, unfortunately, passed a few months after Alice. So it was just like one thing after another that
Like
year. But,
I
but
can't
yeah.
even, I guess can't like multiple losses,
Mm.
multiple. So your father died of cancer.
Well, it wasn't technically directly cancer related, but indirectly from all the treatments and things that he had to get over the years. I mean, he had, 3 or 4 times the normal amount of radiation and chemo you're supposed to have. So,
And then
uh,
also, let's just state the obvious that when your sister died, the amount of stress that brought into his life, I'm sure, too, just knocked him down, right? He just,
it was tough. I think that was crazy enough. I think that was one of the toughest things about the situation with Alice, is that my dad, who had been through multiple cancer, I mean, at this point he'd already been through 3 cancers. He wasn't getting any new cancers at the time, but he would often be hospitalized. I mean, he just had no immune system. So every time he got
right.
a cold, got pneumonia, and he couldn't eat anymore, he'd feeding tube, but he was always a fighter. And then, unfortunately, when he was hospitalized after Alice was killed, it just seemed like the will to fight had left him, that it just was too much now. He was like, why am I hanging on?
Yeah.
Um, because he could, whatever was going on, I don't understand it all medically, but he could have lived longer with a low quality of life, right? And I think previously he would have chosen that, but after darkness had touched him in such a profound way, I think he was like, just let me go.
I mean, I feel people when I'm interviewing them, and I
Right.
feel like this, these tears welling just in my heart, just at the thought of what your whole family was dealing with is so big. Just the thought of it for me, you're all of you dealing with a father who has been battling these illnesses. This sister who everyone's been worried about, right? Because she is in this relationship that is dangerous. And I can only imagine what your mother was going through, or actually can't, and how she was holding it all. So now your sister dies, your father starts to go downhill. Tell me, to the best of your ability, what are you doing? Like you're the word that is coming to my mind right now is the pillar inside this family. Like somehow
Mm.
you taking on this role of trying to hold it all together. Tell me what was happening for you. What
I feel like there were I mean, I don't, maybe I just don't want to take all the credit because, but I certainly can't. I don't think there were, I think there were three pillars standing. I mean, my brother is a much more rational, reasonable thinker than I am, if that's the way to put it. I mean, he's just more like a mathematical brain, and I'm more of a creative brain. And so anything that had to do with logistics, scheduling, talking to the police about the homicide investigation, things like that, he was on top of that. He was on top of all of those things. And he was like super helpful because I don't think us other two emotional beings could have done that with as much or as swiftly as he did, certainly. And then, I think my mom was just falling apart with good reason.
Yeah.
But, and I think I was trying so hard to be there for her, but at the same time was, didn't have myself together. So it's really hard to try to be the pillar of support for someone else when you were also crumbling.
Right. So what were you doing? Like, what were you doing? How were you dealing with all of this? Because as you said, you're the creative, you're a filmmaker. And we're going to get into that. I really want to get into the heart of this is around because your film is so beautifully done. It moved me.
Thank you.
I watched it twice and we'll have a link to that in the show notes. And I want us to go there in a moment, but I want to know what was happening for you because I know for me, I was falling apart, but I also had to do this thing with my parents of try to pretend. I guess pretend is the only word I can ever come up with because I felt like I couldn't actively grieve in front of them. What was it like for you?
Well, just to kind of paint the whole picture first, on November 1st, my wife and I bought our house. On November 4th, Alice was killed. On November 9th, my wife and I got married. So it was all within like the same 10 days. A lot of exciting things happened. And just before the wedding, we found out that we were pregnant with our second child. So there was a lot going on. And a lot, that's all great. I mean, it's stress, but it's positive stress, right? I mean, it's like growth
Well,
and
wait though, wait.
Mhm.
Because I now remember this, the wedding, you decided to, that was a conscious decision, right? Because lots of people would have said, we're canceling this wedding, man. Like, this is way
Right.
too much for us. But it was an intentional decision. Tell us why you decided to go ahead and keep that wedding date.
I think unfortunately a lot of it was just money. I mean, there's just so much money that's thrown around at a wedding, and it wasn't changing the fact that Cecilia and I were in love and we wanted to be together forever. So we were going to have to navigate this new challenge, whether we were legally bound or not. So why not? I mean,
I know, and I love that you kept the wedding, but what happened at the wedding? What did it feel like? Like, because I talk a lot about holding joy and grief at the same time,
I
and it's very difficult to understand, but that is exactly there is not a more beautiful example of that than having a wedding after the murder of your sister, right?
yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I had so much anxiety leading up to the wedding that wasn't really wedding related. It was more like, how can we be doing this without her? And so soon afterwards, and we didn't even really know what happened yet, honestly, just that they weren't there. But I don't know how, but for one night, we were all kind of able to put that aside. Maybe not forget about it. Certainly, I mean, maybe it's wrong. We certainly didn't forget about it. And it was, part of the ceremony in many ways. But at the same time, life is joy and pain, right? And sometimes they're intermingled. And I think Cece and I knew that we both wanted to be there for each other in really tough times. Like, we weren't going to give up. So this was kind of the ultimate physical expression of that, was having a party in the middle of the, worst week of my life. And
I just think it's a beautiful depiction of that idea of that joy and grief. I just,
I don't
remember,
regret it. I can tell you
yeah.
that much. I don't regret it. At the time, I thought that I might, or that this was insane that we were doing this. But honestly, Saturday we had the wedding, Sunday we had the funeral. If Sunday
Jesus, Ed.
had happened without Saturday, I think it would have been a lot harder.
Wow. It's a lot just to take in, just to even hear it is a lot to take in of how does one begin to even adjust to the roller coaster of what you guys were going through. I just can't even imagine. And part of it too is that, I mean, you know, this is where the grace comes in, where you're still in shock too, right? And that's part of what keeps us being able to move through it, is that I remember after my brother died, he died over in Hong Kong, and I had to go, and they were and they were there on a job for my brother, but they had brought my sister-in-law and little 3.5-year-old niece, they had tacked on a vacation, so they were going to Disneyland.
Ooh,
So me and my older brother had to follow through and take her to Disneyland, and it was like, what is happening right now? Like that's the only thing that comes to mind when you describe it. It just felt so surreal. That word is overused, I know, but this is a perfect example of what
yeah.
surreal actually means. It's an out of
Right.
body experience, right?
Yes.
So you get through your wedding, you get through the funeral. Tell us what
Mhm.
happens next for you and what leads you to finally making this movie, and how long it took before you were able to do this new venture with this documentary that you did.
I think, gosh, that's tough to say. I think that this sounds crass, but I feel like within hours of Alice's death, I mean, I just felt like that's the way I wanted to express myself. But I knew that I wasn't ready. I didn't quite know what the film would be about yet. And then as months dragged on and there still hadn't even been arrests made and things, like that's when it really just felt like we are so hopeless and helpless in this situation. I mean, we're relying on other professionals to do their jobs to catch the criminals. And then, that being said, like it doesn't change the fact that Alice is gone either. So like even the hope of hoping that there will be arrests and convictions, it doesn't change the fact that she's gone, but it does make the world a little less scary. It makes the world make a little more sense, since you're a little kid, you hear that like if something bad happens, the police will take care of you, and and that at least ended up being true in my situation.
Did you guys
So,
have to go to
anyways,
court? Was there a trial? Like what happened to sort of
there
get
was. So it took, I want to say it was 3 years before the first trial. It was nearly a whole year before they even made arrests. And but if you have like a hunch or a tip and you arrest someone too early without all the evidence, that's not going to stick. So they had to. I mean, they had to really work the case. Like they plotted along, and step by step they put all the puzzle pieces together, and they really, as much of a compelling case as they could get without real physical evidence, they put it together. And both perpetrators were, they have life in jail, adult, 2 life sentences each. So it all ended up, as happily as it could, legally. But in between the first, so there were 2 murderers, and in between the first and second trial, I started making this film.
And what are we talking for time span?
I think it's about 3 years after the murders happened that I was finally maybe clear-headed enough to at least start exploring things. I didn't have answers, but I at least felt like I had the motivation and wherewithal to investigate, right? And however, my investigation is not like a criminal investigation. I had, like we talked about, Alice, kind of between high school and when she died, those 6 years, she was ashamed that she wasn't doing well in school. So, when she felt shame or she felt embarrassed, she didn't reach out to us. And then she was ashamed that she was in a relationship that she couldn't quite figure out if it was, really right for her. And she kept giving him second, third, fourth chances, and she knew that we didn't want that for her. And so we didn't really know a lot about her for the last 4 to 6 years of her life, unfortunately. At least I didn't. Maybe my parents had a better picture.
Probably
Um,
not, probably not.
but,
She was,
but
and
those are
she's
the ages
also,
you're supposed
I
to
was
be
just
like on
gonna,
your own,
I
right?
was just gonna say that, like, my parents don't have a clue what I was doing during that time in my life.
Right,
I was into all sorts of things, right? And
right.
you're busy, and we didn't have cell phones, and we weren't attached to our parents through texts and phones. I mean, do you remember the days? Sorry, I'm just having a funny little
Fine.
side note here in college, where you had the little pay phones and you'd see the phone hanging, like a parent would call and nobody could, like, it was just hanging there, like, and then you'd go hang it up. And but we live in a very different world. But during this time, this was the time when we're exploring and we're off and we're
Right.
figuring stuff out, and our parents don't really have any idea, right? Because it's the
Yeah.
time where we get to figure out what do we like, what do we enjoy, what do we want to do, and it's a very carefree time. in our life. But with that, though, this is what your whole movie is about, where then you're trying to piece together and understand Alice's life. But it was also your opportunity to explore your own grief and
Yeah.
this new world design you're in, right?
Yeah. Yes, and kind of unexpectedly, I mean, maybe I should have expected it, but I just learned so many new stories about Alice that it almost felt like she was like kind of alive again for a moment. Every time I learned something new about her, right? Because I didn't know I would have any more new experiences or stories or pictures even that her friends shared with me. So that was all, it was all very emotional and very difficult, but in the end, very healing to have been able to go out and meet a whole lot of new people that I never met before. I mean, I tracked down a lot of Alice's friends that I'd heard about or that she was friends with on Facebook, people that interacted with her, digitally. And I met them and we interviewed them and talked to a lot of her friends from childhood and from high school and kind of pieced together a pretty I mean, as much as you can anyways, in 90 minutes on screen, a pretty full picture of who Alice was, I think.
How did you
Both
find all the
both the good and bad.
how did you find all the people? Because there were people that you didn't know that you interviewed, right? That were part of her life. How did you even go about hunting these people down? And I have another question on top of that
Mhm.
is how were you able to do this? Because you had a whole family, you were working full time, like right,
Yeah.
doing film is it is a full-on commitment, right? Of interviewing these people. You had to fly to places too, right? Like you had to actually, so talk to us about this whole process for you.
I mean, in terms of the full-time job thing, I was working, but I was in the film industry already. So, and that's kind of almost exclusively freelance. So I could kind of make my own schedule. And if I want to go out on the road and shoot this for 2 weeks and then come back and do some more jobs, that was an option, right? Because I could do kind of whatever as long as ends were being met. Tracking down people, that's so funny. I kind of feel like I blacked out during that time. I was a man on a mission. So I don't know. I was just obsessed with it, maybe to an unhealthy place, honestly, an unhealthy version. But I knew a few people that I'd met kind of in passing or that Alice had brought back to the house for a weekend or something. So I reached out to them first. And then from there, I was able to kind of just spider web out to
Follow the breadcrumbs,
the
right? You just sort of
Mhm.
follow. What was going on with you and your wife? Because you had little children.
Right.
How was she during this? Because the one thing that I do talk about, and I know that I don't, is the way a death impacts us, but it's the way that it impacts the people around us in our
Right.
relationships. I was also equally obsessed writing my book, so I know exactly what that feels like because you're living it brought me closer to my brother, but you're literally living the death over and over and over and over and over again too, right? It's supercharged emotionally. So what is happening with your marriage, with you being a dad and with this grief that you are carrying around? What did that look like?
I think there was a dichotomy there because I do feel like the levity of having young kids and the joy that they can bring you and the distraction almost. I mean, the crazy thing is I feel like the kids should be the biggest thing in your life and then other things should be distractions. And in this case, they were the distraction, but a welcome distraction, right? I think that they both kept me alive in some ways. I mean, I think that I would have had a much more difficult time pulling myself out of the dark place if it wasn't for, just innocent little kids around me, and a wife that I was very much in love with. But it also, I think I definitely, that's the thing that pains me the most about the whole thing is I think that there's probably 5 years in there where I was not a very nice husband and definitely not the husband and father that I want to be. I mean, I think that I was only operating at maybe 50% capacity in those areas, and I regret that very much. However, I feel like as I'm getting older, I think in short term, long term, all the time. Short term would be great to have this candy, and then tomorrow I'm going to feel like, gosh darn it, I messed up again, and now I have to do like way more exercise, right? Something like that, right? And then like long term, doing the work that I did to like be introspective and extrospective about Alice has saved the years following, but the years during the work were tough, Right.
So and we're going to pause here because I have a lot to say about this, that,
Right.
the talks that I give on grief and loss is exactly this. You have to leave the space for it because
Yeah.
the discomfort of grief is so profound that people want to run away from it, right? Or stuff it. And, or, so we, I heard a term a while ago that I loved, and they talked about water skiing over it. And I thought that's a really beautiful
Mm,
metaphor, that if we don't do our work, it will leak out all over the place, and it can also
mm,
end up in disease in the body. And so, because I feel the same, right, when I was doing my grief, I was very aware that I was doing some deep grief work, and that it was absolutely necessary for me to actually be able to get to a place where I could live an authentically joyful life again, and not
yes.
become the experience of grief and have it stuck inside my body. And that is exactly what you were doing, which makes you a far better partner and father, that you are able to truly experience and leave the space for that grief. You, because we don't have to, there's plenty of people that don't, you know,
Right.
and that doesn't look very pretty sometimes, right? People can actually
Right.
become the experience of anger and rage and hold
Yep.
that throughout a
Yep.
lifetime. So I appreciate you saying that. Now let's talk about the journey of the film,
Can I say
particularly.
one more thing first? I think that
Yes.
if someone's in it and listening to this, I think that it's very easy to want to run away from it, like you said. But like I guess just reinforcing that, I think going towards it and making sure that I'm working through it instead of away from it, like it made all the difference for me. And it took a long time. And
Yep.
I'm very lucky that I have a very patient and loving family. That I mean, there, I think if we didn't have the bond that we do, it could have been bad. We could be severed.
Same,
But
same with me and my husband.
right,
It easily could have gone in the other direction. No question about it.
right.
And
And I
I
just
love for people to hear this, because it's the people supporting people in grief. You've got to
right.
give the people the space and just love them through it. Just hold the space. That's it. Sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, you're fine. I just think something that makes way more sense now than it did in the space was, you're doing the best you can. And I hated that. It seemed like a cop out, and I feel like some people could use that as an excuse for bad behavior, right? Because, well, I'm doing the best I can. Yeah, I mean, whatever, I cheated on you, I'm doing the best I can. Like, there's no excuse for some their lines, but I do feel like there, everyone has good and bad days, and we're doing the best we can every day, hopefully, and that's all we can really expect.
And that is all we can do. And even in the affair, given where we are, our life, our experiences, and that's why we always say, walk in my shoes. And this is
Mhm.
where we can suspend judgment of each other and self, is that we are literally all doing the best we can given who we are, where we are, and our experiences. Period. Full stop.
Right.
That is the truth.
Yeah.
So here you are making this film. How long did the film take you?
I think it took about 2 years. We had a year of filming in between the trials, and then the second trial happened, and we filmed that trial, and then maybe 10 months of editing after that. So about 2 years to make in total. Yeah.
So when you got to the end of this film, how did you feel at the end of the film?
I felt like, first of all, I felt like, how can I ever work on anything ever again? Because this is the most personal thing I can ever do. You know, how do you step away from that? Something that, like, it was easy to be obsessed with. It was all encompassing for me anyway. So now I'm making a film about it. I'll never be this passionate about anything ever again. So there was a little bit, honestly, of a loss when now, what's my goal now? Geez, how can I have a goal that's better than that one? But in the positive spectrum, man, it felt like a weight off. And the more people that saw it and were like supportive of it and flabbergasted by it, and just talking to people who had experienced loss, or had, my dad was, sorry, this is a story that someone viewer told me, my dad was a heroin addict and I never really knew him. And now I want to go, figure out what happened with him, because I think I'm ready to heal after I see how your journey ended up. And it's definitely opened doors to things like this. I mean, I don't think we would have connected if I just was someone who had lost my sister, but because I made a film about it, people know about it, and people know that I'm willing to talk about it. Right.
Yeah.
So,
And what that does for people. I mean, I know that when I asked you that because I also interviewed a bunch of people. I mean, I think that you and I are process, the medium is different, but the process was very similar in terms of, I think that we're storytellers, right? That's what we do. We tell stories in these different mediums. And I remember getting to the end of the book and feeling exactly. In fact, I haven't. I started working on another book, and I haven't. I let it go because it was the same thing. I haven't been able to sink my teeth into something quite as deeply as I could sink my teeth into that. It still to this day feels like the most important piece. I'm gonna cry. I can't. Gosh, I haven't felt. Wow, I can't. This is coming up for me, and I can't believe it. But I haven't felt. I felt like when I finished that book, how could I do anything as important again? As this, because it felt like not only a lifeline, but it is a legacy to my brother, right? Like this film is a legacy to your sister's life,
Yeah.
and that just feels so big, and what it offers other people. And that's the beauty of art, is that the people that are able to read that book or see that movie or that painting or whatever
Mm.
ways we express ourselves, it people take what they need from it wherever they are in their own journey, so it lives on, and it never dies.
Hmm.
Like the people that we've lost. So
Right.
here you are now. That film, what year was that film released?
Ooh, 2020, no, maybe 2018 or 2019, I think.
I was thinking 2019.
I think it's
So
19. You're right.
so now in hindsight, right? Because now it's been a few years,
That's
uh,
crazy.
isn't it crazy? And then of course we go through COVID, but what, how do you I can't go back and read my book, right? Because I
Mm.
would write a different book now because I have, of course, hindsight is everything. My brother died in 2014. Tell me how you feel. Have you watched the film again? Have you thought about a new project? Where are you with the grief around your sister?
When you're making a film, especially a documentary that doesn't really, I mean, maybe not especially, but definitely in this case. So with like a fiction feature, you write it in before you start shooting, right? Because you need to know what you're going to shoot. When it's a documentary, it's a nonfiction, you just kind of, it's whatever comes out in the camera. You plan as much as you can, but you never know what people are going to say or do on camera.
Right.
So the writing happens after you've shot it, right? You have to put it all
Hmm.
together like a puzzle in a way that you think makes the most sense or is the most impactful. So I had to watch it so many times when we were making it to try to figure out, is this the best version of the story? Is it telling Alice's story completely and fairly? And, whatever else. That I definitely needed a break from it. Of course, the first thing you do when you come up with the film is you usually tour with it on like film festivals and things. So
Yeah.
watched it more times with an audience, which was a new energy for sure. Because watching it alone by myself at night is one thing, but with other people in the theater connecting to it and wanting to talk about it afterwards, and now I'm both I'm both clarifying Alice's story, which is another big part of why I did it, because a lot of people thought she was involved with some nefarious activities, which makes sense. I mean, as you hear something like that, you want to hope that someone was at least, not asking for it, but that they knew there were risks about what it wasn't in her case. And that's the most tragic part. But I feel like I set her story straight, but there's a lot of my story in the film too, about, dealing with the aftermath of the loss, and where do we go from here. And so that was just particularly tough to craft, but also audiences could see so much of me, and it felt like I was bearing my soul as well as my sister's soul and a lot of my family, honestly.
No, it was
um,
exquisitely done. Seriously, it deeply. I know all my listeners are going to go run and go watch the movie because it's almost as though what you did to us is open up your heart and let us walk in and be
thank you.
along on this ride with you, this journey with you of watching this whole process of what you were going through. I mean, I could feel it. I talked to you about that after, like the
Mhm.
nuances. I mean, I was right there. I was right there with
Thank you.
you It was
Yeah,
beautiful.
I worked with a fantastic editor. She really helped me put together the best version of the story. She did a fantastic job.
You both did. It was amazing.
But I have actually let's see, I think it was right around Christmas this year, so just a couple weeks ago, that I actually watched the first half of the film because I wanted to see Alice as a little kid and as a live, joyful, person again. I didn't watch the second half when we go into like the autopsy and the brutal facts of the case and things like that. But it was really nice to open up the film and to be able to see her again like that. And like you were saying, it's one of the, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do it, and I was hoping that it would have that impact, at least to me. The other thing was most important is that I was hoping that maybe if I tell this personal story, other people will connect, but it really was just for me, first and foremost, right? And if other people connected and got something out of it, that's just icing on the cake. But it was to heal.
But isn't that the most moving art? The only art is where we have the passion behind it, right? Otherwise, it would be
Totally
meaningless,
right.
right? I
Yeah,
mean that.
that's the thing that I didn't realize when I first started working on it, is that I wanted to tell the story that would just affect so many people. But then I realized that I couldn't possibly have that goal. I needed to make it for me and make it be what I wanted it to be. And then hopefully other people would follow suit. And the more personal and honest you are with something, the more people will connect with it. And I think that's what
You,
ultimately has happened, which is great.
when I was getting my MFA in writing, we did a internship over in Ireland, and or it was our residency, and I met this woman, Claire Keegan, who is a famous writer over there, and she did this
Mhm.
seminar with us, and I'll never forget it. It was one of the most powerful things I had heard, that you have to write into the nerve, right? If you don't care about it, nobody else is going to care about it, right? And as artists, it doesn't matter what kind of art we do, it is driven from a deeper place of passion. This is how we express. And when that happens, that is actually what moves people. And like you said, they're either going to resonate or they won't, right? But the people that are going to resonate with it are the people that need to find it and read it or
Right.
watch it or see it or whatever.
I
And
agree.
and I love that, because that is what I felt. That is what moved me and pulled me along the narrative. Was I cared about you. I cared about you as this brother who had lost his sister. And so, and that's what you did. You pulled me into caring, not just about your sister who had died and bringing her alive, but your process, right? Because I think that the part around grief, it perplexes me every day of my life that the one sure thing is that we're all going to die, and that somehow it's always a surprise when we lose somebody in our life, and we're left with
And
this immensity of this grief, and then it's still so taboo to talk about it. It's weird. I just find it weird, and
I
part of
agree.
that is that we don't want to believe that this can find us or enter into our own lives. And so we seek this out when we are in this complete darkness. We are desperate to find somebody who has gone through it and who
Right.
actually can enjoy life again. Because for me, the most terrifying part was I was never going to feel joy. That was my deepest fear, quite honestly. And so
And
go ahead.
honestly, just to compound on that, I feel like, and then when I did feel joy, I felt guilty. It's like, how can I be happy right now? When this awful thing just happened to this person I love so much, what right do I have to be happy right now? But
Yes.
over time, that is definitely flopped, and I can't tell you if it would have happened without doing the work.
No, I can tell you that
I don't think it
I've been in this
would.
work a long time. I have clients. The space, as human beings, we are here to experience. If we have got to honor our
Yeah.
feelings and our emotions and not deny them and judge them. And that guilt, the shame, all of these things, that's what I was talking about earlier. We lose the person and we're sad, which we would be because they are no longer here. But it's the things that compound it that prolong our suffering. And we've got to be able to leave space for all of it so we can get on that other side, which is integration. It is the grief is the first part, that expression of what it feels like. It comes in a whole
Mhm.
bunch of different ways. And then the mourning is that pure integration of, I've got this loss. It is a part of my life, and I have woven that into the tapestry of my life. And people do that in all these different ways. So
Is that the final stage then? Is that until you meet your demise? That's the final stage, or is there another level?
that's the stage. It is understanding that our whole life is that we come here as sovereign beings to experience everything. And part of that experience is deep grief. And it's not denying ourselves or trying to get ourselves out of it. It's it's leaning into it. It is allowing, surrendering. People think surrendering is kind of throwing up the white flag. Surrendering is opening up to our life
Mm,
process, right? You and I both still cried over our siblings today. It's going to be
right,
10 years for me in February, right?
right.
It just
Yeah,
comes up. I am deeply, I love this life so much because of the experience I've been through. And I still miss my brother. I talk to
right,
him, I believe in the afterlife, but I don't get to talk to him like I'm talking to you and hold him and all
right.
of the things, right? It changes though, it transforms over time. And so that's why I was asking. And I know I can't believe we're already at the top of the hour. We got to wind down, but I want to know where you are today because you said, okay, how am I ever going to make another film? Like, tell us where you
Yeah.
are today.
So I moved to Arizona and I was flying kind of all around the country doing projects. Excuse me. COVID happened and grounded me, and the kids just did so much better, even during the pandemic, to have both parents around. So I realized I needed to find something local. So I've been doing commercials in Arizona ever since, and it's still using the same medium to express something, but it's not quite as personal. And I think maybe I needed a break from that, the personal aspect, honestly. Um, Funny enough, I kind of like started working on a project about Bigfoot at one point because it seemed like their stakes were so much lower, but also something that I thought was interesting and exciting
And kind of fun.
and fun. Yeah. And just, it's more about, I don't have no, belief that I'm going to like catch Bigfoot on camera or something. It's more about
You
the
never know,
story
Edwin.
of people who are into it, right? This little niche community everyone kind of calls is like, off the rocker. I think it's interesting that how they all are linked together, and they had this odd, well, odd might be the wrong choice of word, but just this very unique community of people who like very strongly believe that there's this creature out there that no one's been able to prove. I think that's very fascinating to see how people interact in that mindset.
I have to ask, do you believe in Bigfoot?
I think they do. Yeah.
I think I do too.
I don't know if it's like, there's like about 10 different versions of what Bigfoot, the species, is, but I think there's something that people are seeing, whether it's a bear standing on its legs, or if it's, a gorilla that got loose from the zoo or something. I think there's something that people are seeing.
That's just a fun, yeah, it's just kind of fun to end it on this way. So I have two
Yeah,
questions for you that I always end. But
great.
before I ask you the questions, I want to ask you, is there anything that you feel like listeners really need to hear about your process that I haven't asked? Is there something else that you would like to say?
Just broader than, I mean, I think it's good that we spoke very personally, but I think having spoken to a lot of people who have gone through grief since I've become a magnet for that kind of, also I welcome it. So if anyone wants to find me, please, that's fine. Let's talk.
They will. They'll come find you.
Good, good. You can find me very easily on Instagram. And when Alice died, I decided that I was going to start reading a whole bunch of literature of people's experiences, mothers that were grieving, or just people who had had profound loss, and how they dealt with it. And unfortunately, none of that was super helpful to me right off the bat, because it was so raw, and it had only been like a couple weeks or months or something, and I expected like that I was going to get something out of this, and I just wasn't ready to receive it yet. And I think that there are a lot of people who feel that way, and think that that's it. Like, this is the way I'm going to be the rest of my life. And I did feel that way, but I didn't stop fighting. I didn't. It was it's a little demoralizing to think I'm trying really hard and nothing seems to be feeling any better. But now, 10 years later, that whole decade, unfortunately, but 10 years later, it feels so different. And that's because of the continued efforts, to do the work, and to go to places that were uncomfortable emotionally and live with them, instead of, like you said, running away from the issues. And I just want to encourage anyone who's going through this and they feel like nothing is making things better. I think that it's kind of like a kid, you know, like you see your kid every single day and you don't feel like they're growing, but if you see them in 3 months, they are like a head taller, and you don't realize the little increments that of progress that you're making. And but if you compare them years later, you will realize, wow, I'm in a much different place, and I'm glad that
Yeah.
I pulled myself out of that.
And that's so beautifully put because we call it post-traumatic growth, and it really is. What are the guideposts that you have made? Movement, little tiny baby steps. That's all it is, right? They're just baby
Mm,
steps.
yep.
And I always say, know when you need help, know when you need to reach out. And sometimes we can't do it alone. I certainly didn't. Did you ever get therapy, or was your therapy really making the movie?
I did a lot of talk therapy. I did some EMDR as well, which seemed to
Great.
help different ways. But I also think that I could have benefited from maybe starting therapy when I started the film. I don't think that dealing with the murder without knowing any of the details and not knowing even know what I was really feeling was, I don't think it was super helpful to me yet. I wasn't ready to really be honest until years later. I
Yeah.
know that seems like a long time to be waffling, but I think I had to figure out things about myself before I could pay someone to to really give me tools to in my backpack. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, most of the people that I see, it's been well over a year. It takes a while. It took me about a year. I had to get through the first year anyway. There was too much happening with my family, and so that I could, like you said, I think that I love what you said, receive. I think it takes a while before we are in such a deeply wounded place and so closed off, almost like I think a ball of a fist, before we can really start opening to receive anything. We don't want to hear advice. I didn't want to hear a single thing, and I certainly couldn't have dealt with a therapist at the time, right? Because I wasn't
Right.
ready to even get better. I just needed to be in my grief. I really did. I was like, I was full on wallow, and I was fine with that. I took a leave from work, and I let myself. And
Good.
maybe
Yeah.
part of it was being a therapist and understand, and not everybody has the luxury of taking time off from work. So I
Right.
always say it doesn't matter. If you can give yourself 30 minutes at night after you put the kids to bed and just be with you, whatever it is that you can do, give yourself that. It doesn't matter how big or small, it's the intentionality. I'm giving myself this 10 minutes alone in the bathroom to take a shower and cry. It doesn't, right? And so it's whatever it is that you can manage. Okay. So I cannot believe how fast this conversation has flown by.
I feel the same way.
So I want to ask you, tell me, often I know through the process, the idea of what self-love means really changes
Mm,
when we go through something so significant, and having that contrast of what not taking care of yourself at all really looks like. What does
yeah.
self-love mean to you now? What is that? How does that show up in your life? What do you do?
It's weird. You know, we kind of talked about how that period of my life, I feel like I was robbed of years of like being a proper parent. So
Mm.
now I honestly, I need self-care from the parenting sometimes, but I feel like
Yeah.
being able to just have that be the main concern in my life is a luxury now, you know? I mean,
Mm.
so being able to be a parent and be present and not be thinking about the hurt and rage of Alice's murder, that's self-love for me, is that I am able to compartmentalize that in a healthy way now, and then I can just be available to be a parent again. And certainly it still comes up. I mean, that's the thing that's,
That's the thing, right?
I think it's less frequent now and less intense maybe when it does. Certainly I don't have the like unbottled rage or just like Italian mother grief anymore, but it's still present. It's still, like you said, it's woven into my story,
Yeah.
just like you feel. And so it'll come up. And I think that another version of self-love for me is being able to allow it to come up and not just stuff it down, and being able, and now knowing that it may not feel great in the short term, but long term, that if I allow myself to deal with it when it comes up, that it will be more subdued overall. Whereas if I keep pushing it down, it's going to fight back, and that's what.
100%.
Yeah.
I say that, going back to that, we're experiencers, right? As experiencers, we have to experience everything in this life. Otherwise, we wouldn't know the contrast of what good feels like, and we wouldn't be able to make that preference, right? Like leaning into maybe the rage comes up, and I talk about being a screen where now the rage can come up and it can move through you more quickly so that then you can re-engage with what brings you joy, right? Whether it's your children or whatnot. The stepping down, you know, there we have cliches for a reason. What we resist persists, right? What we focus on grows. Use whatever term you want, but it's just the truth. It's energy. That's all we are, is energy. And where we put our energy, where we put our focus grows. And it's allowing it. It's in the allowing that it moves through us much more quickly, and we can let it go so that we, like I said earlier, we don't become the experience of rage, right?
Yeah.
That's the key. And so I love every single thing that you said. Thank you so much. So let me
Uh,
ask you, so this is not a religious connotation when I ask this question. Finish this sentence, what does faith mean to you?
when I grew up in the church, and I used to think that it was just something that you blindly believe, and maybe that's true for some people. I think faith is persistence, because I think that there are times where I definitely have to choose to have faith in someone, in a concept, in the direction that I want my life to be going, and I have to have faith that again, that long term versus short term, their short term decisions will kind of make the long term consequences that I'd like them to, right? So I
Mm,
think that's faith for me, is faith, having faith in yourself before everything else, to know that
yes.
you're going in the right direction, that maybe the it looks like a roller coaster, but the trajectory is going up, the progress is going the way you want it to. And I think it's persistence, because there are times where it doesn't feel like you're making progress, not just in grief, in everything,
In
yeah,
life, just
right.
life. Yeah.
Yeah, and losing weight, or if you wanted to, get a better job, go to school, whatever it is, it takes a long time to do anything impactful, I think. And again, back to those baby steps and the persistence, to know that, it doesn't feel like a lot of progress is being made very quickly, but with the persistence and time, that it will.
And faith, what you just said too, faith, the belief in yourself, right?
Mhm.
And
Yes,
loving yourself through all of the messiness of life,
right.
not denying it, but just loving yourself through it rather than resisting those emotions that come up inside of us as human beings. And gosh, I want to thank you. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I knew this interview was going to be well worth the wait when we were going to
Thank
be
you.
able to make this happen. I knew it. And I'm just, I'm deeply grateful. And thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing your story.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you for giving us all a platform to talk about the difficult things, and for listeners to listen about the difficult things. I think that's very important. And like you said, it's something we all shy away from. And
Yeah.
it's nice to have a public forum to be able to do that.
So I want to thank all of my listeners. I love you guys. And we'll see you here again next week. And we've got everything in the show notes. You will be able to access the film. And it's on, is it not Turbo? What's the name of that? What's the name of that platform?
Mm, I can look it up
Oh,
right now.
do you know what I'm
So it's,
talking
it's
about?
changed. It's changed hands a few times, but one
Uh,
second.
oh, it has.
Definitely find it on
I just need to make sure I've got the link in.
door.
I can find the link I can find it anyway,
It's on
actually.
Tubi. It's on Roku. It's
Tubi,
on
Tubi,
Vudu. Yeah,
Tubi, that's where I saw it. So we will have those links so that you guys can access,
great.
and please watch it. It is so well worth the watch, even if listeners, you haven't experienced a deep loss, it's an experience. That is what I will say.
Thank you.
So thanks, guys. We'll see you all here next week. Bye for now.